NRATV with Bill Whittle.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Hot Mike. Hot Mike is having some minor brain surgery. We expect him back tomorrow. Until then, I'm Bill Whittle sitting in for him here from Los Angeles. And as usual, there's an entire slew of things that are appalling, interesting, disgusting, depending on how far out in the weeds we want to go today. So let's start with some more of this overall rhetoric, because it shows basically about media bias and some of the cultural bias as well. As we all know, Representative Scalise was shot last week, and we are now in a headlong rush to see who can accuse the other side the fastest and the most loudly about who should be saying what to whom and when we should be saying it. However, it did sound for a moment like we were getting a voice of actual, civility when we heard MSNBC's host Joy Reid calling for a new kind of a civility and kind of improving the tone of the national debate. So why don't we start there?
A little bit.
The tone really matters, and the word tone was used a lot this morning, and sometimes we feel like we're sort of victims of the tone.
We can set a tone to tell the nation we should disagree on things, but we don't ever do this.
I'm going to say that I think the tone does need to change.
We've all been reminded in a really horrible way about the necessity to maintain the right tone here.
Bring the tone of the rhetoric down.
Tone down the rhetoric.
Tone it down.
Tone it down. Welcome back to AM Joy. In a rare display of bipartisan agreement in Washington, Democrats and Republicans coalesced around one talking point after the Wednesday shooting at a GOP congressional baseball practice. It's time for a tonal shift in our politics. But shortly after the shooting, Republican Representative Chris Collins struck a different note from the Kumbaya chorus by placing the blame squarely on the other side of the aisle.
I always try to look for a silver lining in any tragedy like this. I can only hope that the Democrats do tone down the rhetoric. The rhetoric has been outrageous of the finger pointing, the just the tone and the angst and the anger directed at Donald Trump, his supporters. Really, then, some people react to things like that. They get angry as well.
Well, you could certainly hear how outraged and violent and divisive and how absolutely lack of respectful that little tweet clip was, rather. So I don't really understand, Joy. You do a segment where you talk about improving the tone, and then you show a bunch of politicians saying we should improve the tone, and then you say we should improve the tone, and then you say, but the Republicans started it with this statement, which sounds as civil as anything I've ever heard. He's talking about the tone, just like everything else that you played just prior to this clip. Not sure that's really the strongest point I've ever heard. But, of course, we know what's really going on behind the scenes, because just a few moments later, we got to hear the same host say this.
Timeline. And it's a delicate thing because, obviously everybody is wishing the congressman well and hoping that he recovers.
Sure.
But Steve Scalise has a history that we've all been forced to sort of ignore on race. He did come to leadership after some controversy over attending a white nationalist event, which he says he didn't know what it was. He also co-sponsored a bill to amend the Constitution to define marriages between a man and a woman. He voted for the House health care bill, which, as you said, would gut health care for millions of people, including 3 million children, and he co-sponsored a bill to repeal the ban on semi-automatic weapons. Because he is in jeopardy and everyone is pulling for him, are we required in a moral sense to put that aside at the moment?
What we're required to say is we hope he recovers, and then when he recovers, there's a renewed mindset.
So let's make sure we get this straight. We get an entire lecture on civility and tone. Then we're told that the Republicans have started the fight by saying we should reduce the tone and level the tone out and moderate the tone. And then we go directly to the same host who called for a new civility, saying that while we're very sorry he's in the hospital, he is obviously a racist and a child murderer and all the other things he's accused of. She said, well, he spoke at a nationalist meeting. I don't mean to imply anything. Of course not. And he's cut health care, gutted health care for millions of children. So make up your mind. In fact, don't make up your mind. We already know how your mind is made up. This is the fig leaf that you use for this for this rhetoric, which has been going on forever. And the reason I can say this with some confidence is because I don't have to call her a racist just because I disagree with her. But they can't function. They can't speak without that. This is not just an adjective for them now. This is kind of like some kind of a fundamental vitamin or something that the progressives seem to be able to get out of life. They can't talk about anything unless it's about race. The talk about race is the most divisive thing in the nation, and it's a little hypocritical of you, Joy, to come on and talk about raising the tone, and then as soon as you're finished, make comments about what a racist and a child murderer, the guy who's fighting for his life in the hospital is. I don't really buy it. It seems just pretty flat out bull to me. And by the way, here's another tweet from the very same person, from Joy. What a lovely, joyous person she is. She tweeted, Scalise was shot by a white man with a violent background and saved by a black lesbian police officer. And yet... Okay. Listen, you have a right to say whatever you want to, Joy. You have a right to say whatever you want to, obviously. So do I, so do we all, and we're in the commentary business and we know how that works. But what you really honestly should be a little bit ashamed of is to start a segment by calling for a new civility and tone and then immediately go here and descend to these depths. I find that a little shocking. Matter of fact, I'm not the only person who finds it a little shocking. Joe Scarborough, the host of Morning Joe on MSNBC, thought it was a little bit of bad taste as well. He tweeted, let's see what he said. He said, if you're attacking Steve Scalise's voting record right now, do yourself a favor and just stop now. I can't even believe what I'm seeing. That would be from an MSNBC host who seems to have, at least from a distance, some semblance of a soul and some semblance of decency, and I believe that to be the case with Joe Scarborough. So anyway, now that Joy Reid has set the stage for the new tolerance by declaring everybody racist and child murderers, let's go ahead and have a look at some more of the stories that are out there that just represent this incredible headwind that we have to fight against in terms of the culture and the just plain raw discrimination and bias that we face pretty much every day. Now, to help us do that, we're going to bring in an expert. We're going to bring in our friend Rich Noyes from the Media Research Center. He's the research director over there. Rich, how are you? Good to see you. How have you been?
I'm doing good, Bill. How are you?
I'm doing just great, thanks. Rich, we've got all kinds of stories out there. You know what? I'm going to have to put my drink down because there's too much to cover. Let's start with this one. Because this entire thing is so endemic, it's so systematic. We talk about it every day. It comes to the point, Rich, where we start thinking, well, why are we even bothering to point them out? But if we don't point them out, then they get away with it. So let's see if we can pin some of the tails on some of these donkeys, shall we? I'm interested in this story from the ex-New York Times managing editor Jill Abramson on CNN yesterday. Here's a quote that she had. She said, I do think that both sides are not equally at fault and that there's been a lot of false equivalency at work, especially in the discussion of the past couple of days. I think that in terms of political leadership right now, that both President Trump and the congressional leadership on the Republican side are extremely divisive and that they are really benefiting from a kind of rage machine that operates in this country. Now, Rich, this is what you do for a living. You're a professional. If you had to make an estimation of which side of the aisle was the rage machine, which side do you think it might be?
Well, I mean, what's ironic about this statement, I mean, this is, I think, Jill Abramson speaks for a lot of people, the mindset inside the liberal media, which is that all the nasty stuff in recent years has come from conservatives, it's come from Donald Trump, it's come from the sources on the right. But this is a week in which a Bernie Sanders supporter and volunteer took out a gun and shot at Republicans after asking, are those Republicans out there playing on the baseball field? And then he took his shots at them. And yet they still want to talk about Republicans being the source of all the vitriol in society. You're a little tone deaf if you want to stick with your original talking points after a display like that. Now, I don't think liberals are uniquely to blame for what this one kook did. But the media, after the Gifford shooting, after other problems like this, have gone out of their way to blame conservatives and conservative rhetoric when there's violence against Democrats or sort of other violent instances. And yet here, they refuse to accept any kind of responsibility that there's anything going on their side of the street that they need to worry about. And I think this was, what Jill Abramson was trying to suggest, which was, let's make sure we remind people that Republicans are at fault. The same New York Times that she used to work for, they had an editorial just, I think, on Thursday, where they talk about Sarah Palin being linked to the Gabby Gifford shooting. They had to retract that a few hours later because no such link ever existed. It was basically a fiction put out by left-wingers to try to smear her after the Gabby Gifford shooting in 2011. And yet, they still repeated it as if it was true because that's where their mind is at.
That's right. I remember that very well. Sarah Palin had put out a nationwide map with crosshairs targeting certain political districts in terms of these are districts that we should be fighting in and we can win. There were something like 7 or 8 of them on the map. Then when Gabby Giffords got shot, we were told that Sarah Palin had basically inspired this shooting through her violent rhetoric and her unconscionable use of targets on. Turns out the guy was a lunatic, so imagine my surprise, and that this guy had had a long history of stalking Gabby Giffords. For the first couple days, though, as you said, Rich, you could just feel them. You could feel them begging God for it to be a Republican Tea Partier. When in point of fact, the Tea Party goes out and has rallies, and when they leave the park is cleaner than it was when they came in, as opposed to, Occupy Wall Street, which are scenes of rapes, murders, drug abuse, public defecation, or Black Lives Matter, which basically run around destroying cities. So I'm not entirely sure that this point about the conservatives being the source of all of this divisiveness really holds a lot of water. What do you think?
Well, it does. And I mean, in the case of Jared Loughner, who was the shooter in the Gabby Giffords case, he had, no discernible politics. He was a mentally ill person. The person who shot Congressman Scalise, James Hodgkinson, has a long list of online diatribes, letters to the editor, and activism on the Democratic side. Now, that doesn't make all Democrats responsible, but he has political views that are very well articulated on the far left side. This is a politically motivated attempted assassination by a far left person.
And we don't have to go all the way back to Gabby Gifford. We find that during the election last year, as you remember, there were a lot of fights breaking out at Trump rallies. Find out those people were paid to go there, basically by the DNC. They were paid to go and start fights at Trump rallies. And then after Donald Trump was elected, we saw these rioters in the streets smashing windows, and then somebody tries to listen to a conservative speaker at Berkeley, and they get their head knocked in with a bicycle lock for their trouble and so on. I think this is all projection, Rich. I think this is all projection of their inner feelings onto people like us who I don't see any of this on our side.
But it's also designed for the media narrative. When you sort of put those people in rallies or build the sort of violent confrontations in the street at a Trump event, it's designed to sort of coerce, or maybe you have to coerce very hard, ABC, CBS, CNN, NBC, to run story after story about the violence at the Trump rallies without really ever figuring out who's actually responsible for this violence. And that sort of was trying to create a cloud that it's a Republican problem, it's a conservative problem, when in fact, as you said, a lot of these people were plants, they're professional agitators, they're people on the left going to sow mischief.
That's right. And when you combine that with this ongoing Russia hacked the election story, it's all an effort to undermine Donald Trump and to make any Democrats who might align with a Republican bill radioactive because they helped out, Cheeto Hitler. Rich, when we come back with a couple other stories I'd like to talk to you about, if you can stick around, we'll get to a couple of other these blasts of insanity and hypocrisy. We'll be right back after the break. This is Hot Mike on NRATV.